Okay, Richard Davis. Slide potentially left blank. So James has spoken to you about some of the work going on to enable Moodle to interact with repositories, such as Google, Flickr, etc. And I just wanted to use this opportunity to give you a quick overview of the extensive work that's been going on with repositories in our sector in recent years. Tell you a little bit more about CLASM that James has mentioned, and suggest where I think this is taking us in terms of web applications in education. So first of all, I can't help thinking that repositories is one of the more unfortunate terms we've saddled ourselves with. If there's one reference in particular, I'd be delighted if I never hear again. In fact, the term repository covers a multitude of concepts and activities with overlapping and discrete functions and purposes. Some of you, particularly in HE, will be familiar with the institutional repository, providing online access to research outputs, often open access. These repositories provide a wealth of bibliographical functionality and have also proved useful tools in preparing submissions for RAE and REF. Here I've just shown a few examples at MIT, UCL, Open University. Yes. Closely related are subject repositories, excellent sources of scholarly material for particular subject areas. Among the most widely used subject repositories we have illustrated here archive.org for the sciences, REPEC for economics, ELIS for information science. And yet more of you here may be familiar with the idea of learning object repositories. For example, Jorum, NLN. Here I've also illustrated MIT OpenCourseware. Yet more, repositories of images and multimedia are becoming common, particularly as part of digitisation efforts by libraries, museums and archives. So here again, for example, we have the digitised specimens from the Linnaean Society, recent project of Birmingham Museums, their Pre-Raphaelite collection. Primo, the repository for musical research for our Institute of Musical Research. And just a couple of other kinds of repository worth mentioning too. We can have repositories for the administrative outputs of our institutions, minutes, reports, newsletters. And I might also mention the SourceForge code repository for open source developers. At the recent Library of the Future conference, Peter Murray Russ suggested this was a particularly compelling example of an effective repository. So this covers a lot of ground, and it might seem that virtually any collection of digital materials can be a repository. Sheila Anderson and the late Rachel Heery offered this differentiation. They said that in a repository, content is deposited whether by the content creator, owner or third party. The repository architecture must manage content and metadata. The repository offers a minimum set of basic services, and also it must be sustainable and trusted, well supported and managed. Now, there's an emphasis here on the management of objects. We expect these contents of a repository to be digital assets of some value to an organisation, no less than real paper documents, photos, reports. And it's also worth noting that the repository suggested here need only provide basic services like deposit and retrieval. For more sophisticated operations like aggregation or text mining, we can develop separate applications that in turn interact with the repository. Interestingly too, they didn't specify that a repository has to be open access or that it has to be publicly available. And here I think is the key to the CLASM project, where we're using Moodle together with repositories to address one often overlooked area of content management in education. I'm sure you all recognise the scenario. Once upon a time your course tutor handed out blotchy photocopies of essential chapters and articles for your course. And these days they may be slightly sharper PDFs, a bit more readable, but the same regime applies. These copies must be prepared under the terms of the institution's CLA license, and this requires that the materials be controlled and auditable, and an institutional workflow will involve both tutors and library staff. You see it here, greatly simplified. For those of you interested, all the information you need is on the CLA website. It says, do I need a license? The answer is almost certainly yes. And so the CLASM. It's designed to use the bibliographic content management and access control features of repository applications through a seamless interface with the Moodle VLE. The CLA digitized materials clearly share a lot of features with the conventional content of institutional repositories. For example, bibliographic citation information is important in both cases. And also with learning object repositories, after all, this is just one very distinct type of teaching and learning resource. So CLASM will support submission of digitized materials through the Moodle interface, whether by tutors, course designers or library staff, depending on the institution's workflow. But it will ensure that the CLA materials are all consistently managed and auditable in accordance with the CLA license terms. It uses the stored deposit protocol to enable it to be used with a wide range of repository platforms, as James has mentioned. So we're currently refining the metadata requirements and the workflow support based on information that institutions have already provided us. And if anybody wants to share their own thoughts or experience with me, then catch me afterwards at lunch or around the ULCC stand. And when completed, CLASM will be freely available as a Moodle plugin from Moodle.org and, no doubt, from many code repositories. And so just to end by suggesting that this is just a small example of how we expect and need web-based applications to work in our post-Web 2 world. There's a wide range of increasingly mature APIs and standards for metadata and data interchange. I've just suggested a few in this slide, like RSS and Atom, SWORD in this case, Dublin Core Metadata Initiative. By exploiting things like this, diverse web applications, some in the institution, others in the cloud, can interact with each other in ever more sophisticated ways over the web. And so rather than try, for example, to develop your website within your VLE, or vice versa, or portfolios within your repository, we can increasingly expect to use the right tool for the job, or at least an appropriate tool, and have it interact with other applications that themselves best address other needs. So we started with that quote from Paul Walk from a couple of years ago, his demand for more interoperation. I actually heard that at the same program meeting where I first heard the SWORD project described, that developed the SWORD protocol. In many respects, that early work on interoperability, which much of it's still ongoing, was a leap of faith by the JISC. But I think we are beginning to see in education and in the mainstream the results and benefits. Thank you.